Hello, my name is Xander. Welcome back to Pytest and Django. In the previous tutorial, we started learning about Pytest fixtures. We went through a few different activities, slowly building up to the endpoint where we created a factory. In this tutorial, we look at a fixture replacement in Factory Boy, and then towards the end, we look at Faker, which is a package that's going to generate fake data for you. So it would be worth, if you don't know what a fixture is in Pytest, it is worth looking at the previous tutorials, part 2 specifically, before moving on to this tutorial. So I am kind of expecting there to be some prior knowledge and a general understanding of what I'm talking about going into this tutorial. But just as a quick recap, fixtures in Pytest are functions, typically, that run before or after each test, to which the fixture is applied. In the previous tutorial, I presented this pattern for writing tests: arrange, act, assert. This pattern for writing tests had 3 stages. Arrange. So first of all, before we run an action, we would need to prepare maybe some data, connect to a database, for example, and then we would perform an action. So maybe we were going to save data to a database or retrieve data from a database. So the action might be retrieve data from a database, and then we would assert. So we need to check the outcome of the action against the expected outcome. And that's our test, so true or false. And at that point, we can then determine whether the test is successful or not. So we fed in this idea that fixtures are used to feed data to the tests, such as database connections, URLs to test and input data. So that was the general idea of a Pytest fixture. So it's very much at the start of this pattern here in the arrange step. So Factory Boy then is a fixture replacement tool. So the idea here is that factories can be considered quite onerous and hard to manage. As your application scales, it's hard to manage the fixtures as was presented in the previous tutorial. So here the general idea is that a package such as Package Boy, factories are defined in nice, clean and readable manner. Tools such as Factory Boy, they like to, or they're trying to make it easy to use factory for complex objects. So again, the idea from the previous tutorial where we created our factory and then we were able to create more complex objects, factories, so that we could use them in our tests. So here with utilizing Factory Boy, the idea is that we make or simplify that process for complex objects. And in addition to that, Factory Boy is a class-based approach. So that makes it easy for us to create sub-factories. So for example, if we had a factory, we wanted to connect it to another complex factory, that is a fairly simple process utilizing a package such as Factory Boy. And of course, in addition to that, thinking about foreign keys, reverse foreign keys, many-to-many fields, of course, if we're going to generate data or if we're going to need data from our database in our tests, it's likely that our tables are connected to one another in some sort of dependency. So foreign keys, many-to-manys, reverse foreign keys, those are the type of tools that potentially we're going to need to model our data or prepare our database data in order for us to perform tests. So I've gone ahead and downloaded the previous code, which is available in the link in the description of the video. And you can see that going over to the conftest file here, this is where we ended up creating this user factory in the previous tutorial. This factory allowed us to generate different types of users. So we could generate staff users, admin users from this factory, for example. So what we're going to do now is implement Factory Boy and pretty much do exactly the same thing here, but in Factory Boy. So I'll go ahead and I'll just create a new virtual environment for this. And I'll go ahead and activate that. Okay. So let's go ahead and install Pytest Factory Boy. So I'll copy that over and let's just go ahead and install. So while we're here, we may as well just install Faker as well. So as I said earlier, Faker is a tool that allows us to build fake data. So this is currently 8.1.0. So we may as well go ahead and do that, prepare that straight away. So let's just go ahead and install that too. So the flow of the previous tutorial was we created this factory that allowed us to generate multiple users, utilizing different parameters that we wanted to specify in our test. So if we wanted to make an admin user, we could from this factory, or for example, if we wanted to create a normal user, we could. So all the parameters were kind of set that we could pass in to create a new user. So we then created a fixture and we created 2 new users. So here, for example, is a staff user in this fixture here, new user 2. And then we go ahead to the actual test here, and you can see that we then run the test. In this case, we're going to create a new user 2, which was, if we go back into our fixture here, new user 2 is going to be creating a staff user. So that would have created a staff user. So let's just go ahead and run that test. So Pytest. Oh, I've got a pip install Django. Forgot to do that. So that would generate a new user for us to then test. That's where we're going with that. So let's try that again. So it looks like there's a problem here. You must either define a environment Django or cause a configuration. Okay, so let's go back into our Pytest file here. So core.settings, so that's okay. Pytest. Sorry, I forgot to install Pytest as well. Sorry, I forget that we're starting from fresh again. Apologies. So let's install that as well. Right, so Pytest is now installed. So let's go ahead and actually run Pytest, and you can see how it works. Okay, so I will put a requirements file here for you. So let's go ahead and do that. In case we forget again. Okay, so these are all the requirements or package requirements for this tutorial. Right, sorry about that. Let's get back onto this. So we have successfully run this test. So it's made a new user. So we are printing something here, and that is if the user is staff or not. So let's just check to see that works. So that's just printing out the fact that we've set staff to true. So there we go. So we are setting staff to true in this test that we're running. That's coming from here, from our fixture here. So we're setting is staff to true of this new user. Okay, right, so let's go ahead now and migrate over to Factory Boy. So we're going to just lose all of this here. We're not going to need any of this here, and potentially that as well. So that's in our conf test file here. So remember, this file is run before any tests are tested. Only tests are run by Pytest. So let's first of all go into our test now. Right, so in terms of folder structure for this, it may be that you want to create a test folder and put your factories inside of there. Now, all my tests are here. Now, it might be that your app, you put your tests inside of a folder, maybe inside of your application, just for showcasing what we're doing. I'm placing all my tests here in this folder here. So if you're wondering why I'm doing that, it's just to quickly show how to set this up. I'm going to put this all into one folder here. Now, let's just create a new file called factories. Okay, so that's the first step. Right, so let's go ahead now and import factory. Okay, so that will then obviously give us access to Factory Boy, etc. So let's go ahead and do that. And so what we need to do now is build classes. And essentially what we're doing here is we're going to connect our class here to a model. So essentially that's the first thing we do. We need to make a connection to our existing model. And of course that provides a little bit of flexibility here because we're going to use an existing model. So if our model changes, we know straight away we're still using that particular model. So that provides a little bit more flexibility. So let's go ahead and just start doing this. So let's, because we're still going to be utilizing the user, I'm going to call this user factory. So we're going to bring in the table let's bring in the table for the user, the normal default user Django table. So we're going to need that. Right, so we can make a new class. I'll call this user factory. So we extend from factory and then Django. So this is Django specific here with factory boy. So Django and then Django model factory. So that allows us to work with Django with factory boy. Okay, so let's just define our factory model. So here we're going to create or set up our class meta here, and literally we're just going to define our model. That's the user model. Okay, so now we've attached our user table. We now have defined essentially we want to build a factory from this table. So now we can go ahead and define what it is from this table we want to utilize. So for example, let's just utilize a name. So we can define a default name. So let's do that. Name. I just call this name. And then we can also then set other parameters if we want to. Is staff equals true, for example. So when we run the test, all these parameters here, we can overwrite any of these. So these are just default parameters that we want to set. And obviously these are fields inside of this table in the user table. So previously we installed Faker. So Faker, like I said, is a package that allows us to generate data. So in actual fact, what we can do while we're here is we may as well just import Faker in while we're working. So let's from Faker, let's import Faker. And then we just need to set this up so we access Faker from this new variable Faker. And then now what we need to do is just go ahead and define where we want some data. So here it's going to be, for example, fake. And then we can just define, for example, a name. So that's going to generate a name for us. If you wanted a little bit more information on Faker, I have made a video. If you go over to the channel, just type in Faker, that should take you to this video here, tutorial here, where I go into a lot more detail about how to set up Faker and the different options, and also building your own data, custom data in Faker. So that's how easy it is to set up a factory here with Factory Boy. So now, of course, we want to utilize it. So let's go back to our conf test file. We're going to now register our factories so that they can be utilized within our tests. So to do that, we're just going to, from Pytest Factory Boy, import the register. And then we're then going to need to import our factories. So from, and this is our tests, let's import our factories. So actually, it's probably better at this point to do it this way. From tests, dot factories, let's import our factory. So it's called user factory. So let's just import that individual factory. Okay. So now we need to register. So register, and then it's going to be the user factory. Okay. So now we have this available for our tests. Now it's important to understand that although we've registered this name as user factory, our fixture will be user underscore factory. Okay, so that's how we're going to access this factory here using user underscore factory. That's how we access that, the fixture, the factory fixture here. All right, so let's go ahead now back into our test. I'm just going to comment that out. I'll copy that and comment. So we want to run this or perform the same type of test here. Right, so first of all, let's just bring in our factory. So that is going to be user factory. So like I said, that's going to be underscore user factory, all lowercase. So once we have this here, let's see what's happening by default. So here we're just going to essentially just create a new user in the user model with the username of fake name, whatever the name is generated, and is staff is true. So that's going to generate essentially we're going to generate a new user with these parameters here. So let's just test to make sure the name is being generated. So let's just put assert true. Obviously that's going to then pass the test. So let's go ahead and print the user factory dot and then the username. So let's have a look at this. Right, so let's run our test. And you can see here that the user is being generated from our factory. It's called Maribel. And of course, that's random. So it will change every single time I run the test. So Faker is working. It's running right here, generating the names for our data. So Factory Boy can provide us two built-in strategies. So maybe we want to, from our factory, just produce an object. So here we have just build, and then, or else we want to actually save it to our test database. So therefore we use create. So for example, if we wanted to create a user object, let's go ahead and create a new variable here, user and product factory. So actually that's a user factory dot build. So here we're going to generate a user object, and then we can then go ahead and just test that username. Let's go ahead and do that. There we go. So the same outcome again. Now we can also use, like I said, the second strategy, create. So here we're going to instantiate a local object, our user object, and we're going to save it to the database, the test database. So if we simply just change this to create and then try this again, we're going to receive an error, because what we're trying to do here is we're actually trying to create and add that user to the database. So at this point, we're going to need database access, of course. So to do that, we're going to, because this is a test, of course, we can, of course, there's two ways, like I've shown you in previous tutorials. We can add DB to our input here. But typically, what we're going to do, the strategy here for our test, is just to decorate our test. So we go ahead and pytest.mark Django DB. So let's run the test again. And there we go. So we've saved it now to our test database. So let's save it to our database. Let's go ahead and count all the user objects. Now, we are going to need the user table for that. So we're going to have to bring that in. So here, I'm just showing you as an example. This isn't necessarily the way that you'd want to work. So I'll just bring in the database so that we can access the database, our test database. And let's just go ahead and print the count. So we should have one item. There we go. So one user has been saved into our database, one new user, and the username is Robert McCoy. So let's just go ahead and change create to build. And you can now see that we're just creating the object. We're not saving it to the database. We return 0 items from our database. So that can get a little bit messy. So what we can do in our conf.test file here is we can create a fixture and utilize our factory. So similar to like we kind of ended up in the last tutorial where we created our factory and then created fixtures. So here, what we're doing is we're bringing our factory and we're going to bring in our database as well, allow database access so that we can go ahead and create a new user here, not build, create. And then we can just pass it back to our test. So now we can go into our test, for example, and then just bring in our fixture. And then in this case, I'm just going to print out the username here that's been generated. So we go ahead and test that. And there we go. So we're creating a new user and I've just returned it here in my test. And now I might want to test for certain things. So let's go ahead and actually go into our app now and let's just build a new model, right? So we're going to have two models here. So I'm going to create a category table just with name, max length 255, returning the name. So that's my category. And then I'll go ahead and just build a product. So I'll just paste this in. So this is just taken from the Django e-commerce. These are two tables from the Django e-commerce table. It looks a bit complicated, but the way it's set out. So title, we've got category. So here the category, we have a foreign key connected to our category. So if we're going to do some testing on our product, for example, we want to make a connection to our category. So if you think about how our factory works again, if I was going to build a new product, then I can't build a product because I've got a foreign key to my category table. So I'm going to need to set up a connection between my factories so that when I make a new user, sorry, in this case, make a new product, it then also utilizes the category information. So it follows the foreign key. So just have a look at the code in the repository for this. So I've got discount price, is active, created at, updated at. So just a few different fields here. So I'll go ahead and make migrations. I'll migrate that. There we go. So our tables are now active. I didn't need to do that, of course, because we're creating a testing database, but I've gone ahead and done that. So let's now go back into our factories and see if we can utilize this. So the first thing I'm going to need to do, of course, is just import my models. So if you're used to Django, you're used to importing your models. So that will make my models available. So I've got my core app one, then models. Okay, so that's going to give me access to that. So now I can just go ahead and build some more factories, right? So same type of pattern here. In this case, it's going to be called category factory. And then I'm going to need some meta like before. And then I'm just going to give this a default category called Django. Okay, so that's my category. So I can do exactly the same thing now for the product. So this is going to be a little bit more expansive, of course. So let's go ahead and add a product title. Okay, so I've got product title and then all the other fields that I'm going to need, for example. Okay. Right, so those are all my other fields. So I'm using a bit of fake as well. So I'm going to need to make sure I've got faker in available. Yep, so I'm going to use fake text here, for example. So check out the fake documentation. There's different, I could fake all of this, but I've just added this in for now. So have a look at the other previous tutorial if you want to learn a little bit more about Faker in a little bit more detail. Otherwise, just utilize the Faker documentation. It will describe the different types of data that you can produce. So far I've just shown you two, very simple, the name and faking some text I want to put, for example, in a description. So we have in our database schema, we have the product factory connected to our category utilizing a foreign key in the product table. So here you can see we're using factory.subfactory and we're going to then specify category factory. And this is then essentially generating or replicating the foreign key connection between the product table and the category table. So now when I make a product, it's also then going to generate the category. So let's go back into our tests here. I'm just going to comment the previous test out. So what we're going to need here is a new test. So let's call this new test, or let's test product. So we're going to test the product. So we're going to need to bring in our factory. So in the conf test file here, we're going to need to register our new factory. So let's bring them in. So we've got the product factory and the category factory, and then we're going to need to register them. Okay, so just go ahead and do that. Right, so you could make a fixture here if you want to do, but we're just going to go straight into the tests. So we're going to need to bring the product factory in. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and build a new user. I'll say in this case, sorry, product. So product equals is going to be the product factory. Let's go ahead and just build. And then we will then print the product description, for example. So I'm not really testing anything here. I do apologize. I just want to really set up the factories and just showcase those. So let's go ahead and Pytest. Okay, so you can see that that object has been built, and we've got this fake text that's been generated in our description. So let's just show the case that this doesn't work. So let's just take the category out here, our foreign key to our category, and we will then receive an error. Now, we will receive an error if we were to then actually commit to our database, because we need to remember here, all we're doing here is going back to my test here, we're using build, remember, so we're just generating an object here. Now, if I were to use, for example, create here, let's just quickly add in the database so we can save to a database. When we try and commit that to a database, you can see that we then have the error, the integrity error. And that's because we've got this constraint here, the category in our table. It requires a foreign key. So always remember this create and build concept. To build, we can just build an object. We don't have to worry about our dependencies. But when we want to actually save it to our database, then we've got a problem. So putting that back in to our factory here and then rerunning the tests, you can see that our tests are now passed. We've built that connectivity, our dependency between the tables, and then we're good to go. So check out the documentations for one-to-ones and reverse foreign keys, for example. So it does allow us to really kind of map the whole database here, utilizing this factory very easily in comparison to using the approach first created in the second tutorial. Okay, so hopefully that's moved us on a bit, utilizing Pytest and Django, looking at a fixture replacement here in Factory Boy. And it is very popular to utilize this type of tool over the approach used in the second tutorial. I appreciate this. This is just really an introduction, moving slowly into utilizing Pytest and Django. We will have, or there will be, a bigger example in the Django e-commerce project where we will implement all of these tools into a much larger project to give you a better idea of this working at a larger scale. So definitely go ahead and have a look at that tutorial if it's not already available. So that's been all more. I hope that was useful. And if there's any questions, then just please let me know. Leave them in the comments and I'll try and get back to you. And hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial.